Welcome back to the Cannabis Podcast. I'm your host, Brett David Stelter. Now, this article is interesting. This article says that state marijuana legalization has not really impacted teen use. Federal official says as new youth survey shows stable trends. Teen marijuana use has not increased, even as state legalization has proliferated across the country. A federal official said on Wednesday in announcing the latest data from an annual survey that again showed prohibitionist concerns about youth cannabis access have, quote, not played out, unquote. That's a great, nice way of saying it. The 2022 Monitoring the Future survey, which is conducted by the University of Michigan with funding from the National Institute of Drug Abuse, found that rates of past year cannabis use, quote, remained stable for all three grades surveyed, remaining below pre-pandemic usage levels even as more state marijuana markets opened and expanded for adults. There have been no substantial increases at all, Marsha Lopez, chief of NIDA's epidemiological research branch, said in response to a question from Marijuana Moment during a webinar. In fact, they have not reported an increase in perceived availability either, which is kind of interesting. So whatever is happening with adult use across the country has not really impacted the younger people according to the data here. So she's saying what we all have said, show me the data. The MTF survey, which also asked teens about use of Delta 8 THC products for the first time, showed past year marijuana use at 8.3% for 8th graders, 17.8% for 10th graders, and 29% for 12th graders. While 11 more states legalized marijuana from 2020 to 2022, with variation in the implementation timeline, the survey data shows that the, quote, liberalization of marijuana policies in states, quote, are not translating into increased perceptions of availability among adolescents either. In fact, that has been trending downwards over the years. So, prohibitionists are wrong again. Further, there's been, quote, steadier declines in the perception of harm of use of cannabis without the corresponding increases in use that we might expect as we have in the past. So they're saying people's perceptions of harm of cannabis are going down even if they don't use it because they're kind of realizing, hey, all my friends that use it are fine and there's a lot of benefits, and articles like this that keep coming out. These trends are also being observed despite adult use of marijuana and certain psychedelics reaching historic highs. No pun intended. In 2022, according to separate data that was released earlier this year, advocates have long contested prohibitionist arguments that adult use legalization would lead to increased underage use, arguing that establishing regulated markets where IDs are checked and other safeguards are put in place effectively restrict youth access. And that's been borne out in data from multiple studies. For example, we covered an article that said, I think it was Colorado had 100% compliance with all of their IDs and security around checking IDs in order to purchase cannabis. They had 100% compliance. So they're doing their job. There's also a relatively low prevalence of daily cannabis use, which has been remarkably steady for the last 10 years. That's notable considering the first state recreational marijuana markets opened about a decade ago. While the survey data isn't representative of individual states, NIDA and University of Michigan did compare various marijuana-related indicators from teens living in states where cannabis is illegal and where it's legal for medical use. The survey found no statistically significant difference in rates of past year use across all grades, regardless of state medical marijuana laws. I want to say that again. The survey found no statistically significant difference in rates of past year use across all grades, regardless of state medical marijuana laws. For 10th and 12th graders, there were also no significant differences in perceptions of risk, availability, or disapproval of use. 8th grade students living in states with medical cannabis were somewhat less likely to view use as risky and say there's slightly greater availability, though their use rates were not significantly higher. Meanwhile, the majority of teens who use marijuana still say they're smoking it, the survey found. However, there's been a gradual shift in methods of consumption with more youth vaping or using edibles. Now, I'm all for edibles, but I'm not necessarily a big fan of vaping yet. I'd like that technology to get a little bit better. Working in a cannabis lab, I do know that when you heat up that device, the oil is not the only thing burning, so just be careful and do your own research. For the first time, the MTF 2022 survey also features data on teen use of intoxicating Delta-8 THC products, which are typically derived from federally legal hemp and sold in a largely unregulated market, though some states have enacted restrictions or bans. Honestly, we'll get into this in a different video. Don't mess with D8. It's synthetic. It's sprayed on hemp. Don't. This is just my opinion. Go for THCA if it's available, because at least that's a compound found in the plant. 9 times out of 10, Delta-8 is just synthetically sprayed, which is interesting because we'll get into that another day. It found that 11.4% of 12th graders reported past year use of D8 products. NIDA said future surveys will ask 8th and 10th graders about their use of the cannabinoid also. Richard Mike, or Meach, Mike, I don't know, Reich, one of the two. Richard, team lead of the MTFs, said in a press release that researchers were, quote, surprised to see use levels this high among 12th graders. Moving forward, as policies and access to this drug change, it will be important to continue to monitor use of the drug among teens. I can almost guarantee you, if you legalize weed, no one's going to mess with Delta-8. They're only doing Delta-8 because that's all it's available. And it's usually in red states or states with only a medical program where it's really hard to get a medical license, like Texas, North Carolina, previously Ohio, South Carolina. All these red states that don't have programs, companies are grifting and going into that market because they know it's technically legal to sell D8. So all they're doing is getting hemp, spraying it with D8, not testing it, and selling it to you and telling you it's fun. So, just telling you the truth. For what it's worth, a separate federally funded study published this month signaled that states prohibiting marijuana may, quote, unintentionally promote the use of D8 products, which is kind of what I said. If you don't have any legal way of getting cannabis, what are you going to do? You're going to go to the next best thing, which is Delta-8, which is on the counter, and you think, oh, Delta-8, same as Delta-9. Nope, it's not. It is not the same. Though the MTF surveys have shown that youth cannabis consumption has remained stable, another analysis from the CDC found that rates of current and lifetime cannabis use among high school students have continued to drop amid the legalization movement. I have to repeat that. The CDC found that rates of current and lifetime cannabis use among high school students have continued to drop amid the legalization movement. Now, you kind of have to put that in the box of teen rebelliousness, right? A lot of people, myself included, smoke for the first time because it was cool and it was rebellious and it was illegal. So I'm doing something illegal. Well, if it's legal, what's the fun in that? You know what I mean? You're not really a rebel if you're doing legal stuff. What was especially notable about the data is that it found high school students' use was trending up from 2009 to 2013 before legal marijuana dispensaries started opening, but it's been gradually on the decline since they've opened. The first state recreational legalization laws were approved by voters in 2012, with regulated retail sales beginning in 2014. So we haven't even had regulated cannabis for more than a decade yet. 2024 will be finally a decade. Think about that. That's crazy to think about. Only 10 years it's been legal. So far to go. So far to go. The market is not even close to starting yet. A study of high school students in Massachusetts was published last month found that youth were no more likely to use marijuana after legalization, though more students perceived their parents as cannabis consumers after the policy changed. That's funny. So no more teens are using it, but boomers are getting in on it as soon as it's legal, which kind of proves my other point of boomers tend to follow the rules a lot more than teens do in my generation, millennial generation, and the subsequent generations. A little bit more rule followers. And so now once they get the official green light, they're all good. That's funny. A separate NIDA-funded study that was published in the American Journal of Preventative Medicine last year also found that state-level cannabis legalization is not associated with increased use. The study demonstrated that, quote, youth who spent more of their adolescence under legalization were no more or less likely to have used cannabis at age 15 years than adolescents who spent little or no time under legalization. Yet another federally funded study from Michigan State researchers that was published in the journal PLOS1 last year found that cannabis retail sales might be followed by the increased occurrence of cannabis onsets for older adults, but not for underage persons who cannot buy cannabis. A recent Gallup poll, meanwhile, found that fully half of all Americans adults have tried marijuana at some point in their lives, with rates of active cannabis consumption surpassing that of tobacco. Broken down by age, 29% of those 18 to 34 say they currently smoke marijuana, though that's not necessarily representative of overall cannabis use because the survey only asked about smoking and not other modes of consumption such as edibles, vaping, or tinctures. A ton of people consume cannabis in so many different ways other than smoking, and I totally get it. Smoking smells, it stinks. I personally love and enjoy the smell of a good skunk all over my clothes, which is what cannabis smells like. You think about it back in the day, like I'd go outside and be cold in Ohio and smoke outside my back porch and come right in and I'd just spray like a little bit of cologne on me and be like, oh yeah, I don't smell, I'm fine. And then now when somebody walks in, they just reek. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I totally smelled like weed. Yeah, that didn't mask anything. But at least half of Americans are smoking weed. So this is a fascinating article. And hey, this is great news. Not for the prohibitionists and not for the people that are reefer madness, people that want to just tell everybody that this is the devil's lettuce and kills everybody that ever says the word cannabis. It doesn't. It's official. Teen use is either not impacted or it is slightly decreasing. So that's great news. Let us know what you think about this. When was the first time you tried it? What was it like? How old were you? Let me know in the comments. And I'll tell you more about my story a little bit later. Thanks a lot for joining us, and stay blessed.